Mute daughter breaks. Her silence. What happened in the park left the millionaire speechless. Comment below from which city you're watching and hit the subscribe button for more videos. The world thought Everett Laine had everything. He was a self-made millionaire, a titan in the world of architecture, known for designing skyscrapers that kissed the clouds. His photographs filled glossy magazines, steel-jawed smile, pressed suits, and an empire of glass and stone rising in his name. But what the world didn't know was that Everett carried a secret heartbreak, one no amount of money or prestige could fix. His only daughter, Amira, hadn't spoken a single word in her 8 years of life. Doctors called it selective mutism. Specialists, speech therapists, neurologists, Everett had paid them all. Each assured him she had no physical impairments. Her voice was there, waiting. But it never came. At home, silence sat at the dinner table like a ghost between them. Everett loved her with a ferocity he couldn't always express, but every time he saw her lips part only to close again, every time her eyes darted with words trapped inside, he felt powerless, like all his wealth was a cruel joke. On a gray afternoon in early spring, Everett decided to take her to Brookvale Park. It wasn't planned. His driver had suggested the route when Everett canceled yet another meeting out of exhaustion. Amira loved the carousel there, even if she only watched. As he walked her down the winding gravel path, Everett found himself confessing quietly, words he rarely spoke to anyone. "I just want to hear you, Amira. Once. That's all I ask." His voice cracked, swallowed by the wind rustling through oak branches. That's when it happened. Near the pond, where ducks floated lazily against the current, a man sat on a wooden bench with a battered guitar case at his feet. His skin was dark, his clothes worn, but his back was straight, and his fingers moved with elegance across the instrument's neck. The melody was soft, but it carried through the air like a secret being told to the world. Amira stopped. She let go of her father's hand, something she never did in public, and drifted closer to the music. Everett froze, stunned. He wanted to call her back, worried about strangers, about appearances. But then he saw her face. Her eyes weren't dull or distracted, or locked in that silent prison. They were alive, drawn to the man's song, as if she understood something Everett never could. And then, impossibly, Everett's heart nearly stopped. His daughter's lips parted. A sound slipped out, not a scream, not a hum, but a word. One single, fragile word. Sing. Everett's chest tightened, his knees nearly buckled. For 8 years, he had waited for this. For 8 years, silence had been his prison too. And now, a stranger, someone society might overlook, someone Everett might have overlooked himself, had unlocked the voice that money could not buy. But what Everett didn't know in that breathless moment was that this man's appearance in their lives was no accident, and the ring he wore on his finger would shatter everything Everett thought he knew about family, love, and loyalty. Everett Laine had built his fortune brick by brick, or more accurately, beam by beam. He was an architect by trade, but in the magazines and news profiles, he was always painted as something bigger, a man who transformed entire skylines. His firm, Laine Dynamics, was responsible for half the city's most recognizable landmarks. Towers with mirrored facades that seemed to bend light, courtyards suspended in glass, office blocks shaped like twisting sculptures. Clients adored him. Investors courted him. Even politicians borrowed his language of reimagining the future. But Everett's private world was a hollow echo of the brilliance he projected outward. His wife, Alina, had died in childbirth. He never spoke of it publicly, never let it surface in interviews or glossy spreads. But grief had settled into his bones like frost. He'd tried remarriage once, briefly, but Amira, his daughter, had resisted in ways that words could not articulate. Silent, wide-eyed, she would vanish into corners of their sprawling estate whenever a new woman tried to embrace her. By the time she was 4, Everett stopped introducing potential partners. It wasn't worth the tremors in her body, the way her gaze would dim as if another presence erased her. Amira was his world, even if she didn't speak. At 8 years old, she was small for her age but sharp, her eyes always darting, noticing. Her silence was not emptiness, but intensity. She drew, pages upon pages of sketches that captured details Everett often overlooked. The way sunlight filtered through the library's high windows, the broken hinge on the garden gate, even the wrinkles around his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. Doctors had diagnosed her with selective mutism, yet Everett hated the term. It sounded clinical, dismissive. She wasn't broken. She simply hadn't found her bridge to the world yet. He hired the best speech therapists, flown in from Paris, New York, and Tokyo. He built her an entire art studio in the mansion, hoping creation would coax her into expression. But nothing, not therapy, not toys, not bribes, ever unlocked her voice. Until that day in the park. Brookvale Park was not Everett's usual environment. He disliked crowds, disliked the way strangers' eyes often lingered on him with thinly veiled envy or judgment. But the park was Amira's quiet joy. She liked the carousel horses, though she never rode. She liked the pond, though she never fed the ducks. It was a space she could observe without pressure. Everett tolerated it because of that, because her tiny hand clutching his gave him purpose. That afternoon, though, the park carried something different. The man with the guitar sat like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. His name was Solomon Reed, though Everett wouldn't learn it until later. To most passers-by, Solomon was just another street musician. His guitar was worn, its edges frayed, its strings replaced unevenly. His clothes weren't impressive. Faded, jeans, a shirt with sleeves rolled up, boots that had seen better days. But there was a gravity about him, the kind of presence that made people slow down without realizing why. Amira felt it first. When she slipped from Everett's grasp and drifted toward the music, Everett nearly called after her. He didn't like strangers approaching her, especially not men. His mind filled with headlines, with whispered gossip. Millionaire too careless with daughter. Child endangered in public. He almost stepped forward until he saw her face. Her eyes, normally so guarded, had softened. They widened with something he hadn't seen in years, recognition, as if Solomon's chords had struck a secret she'd been carrying inside. And then, sing, her first word. The sound tore through Everett like lightning. He froze, not from fear, but from awe. He could hardly breathe. All the years of silence, the failed therapies, the money wasted on empty promises, and now, a stranger in the park had succeeded where everyone else had failed. Solomon's reaction was subtle. He didn't look shocked. He didn't leap up or point at her like others might have. Instead, he tilted his head, meeting Amira's gaze with calm, steady warmth. "That's a good word," he said softly, strumming another chord. Everett's throat tightened. He wanted to demand answers. "Who are you? How did you do this? What did you just awaken in my daughter?" But for the first time in years, words failed him too. Amira walked closer. She didn't speak again, but she hummed, an uneven, fragile hum, following the rise and fall of Solomon's guitar. Everett thought his heart might shatter. In that instant, the foundations of Everett's carefully constructed world trembled. He wasn't the savior. He wasn't the solution. It was this man, a stranger, a black man society might dismiss as insignificant, who had given his daughter the key to her voice. But Solomon Reed wasn't just any man. He carried secrets of his own. Before the world reduced him to a street performer, Solomon had been a classical pianist with invitations to Europe's grandest stages. He had known Chopin intimately, had once been hailed as the hands that could speak where voices failed. But one scandal, rooted not in his talent, but in the color of his skin and the accusations of people who wanted him ruined, had ripped it all away. A false charge, a broken career, and a descent into shadows. Now he played in parks, in corners, on forgotten streets. Not for fame, not for applause, but because music was the only way to keep breathing, and fate, or something crueler, had just put him in the path of Everett Laine and his silent daughter. Everett didn't know it yet, but this encounter would spiral far beyond the miracle of Amira's voice. It would drag them all into a collision of prejudice, pride, and hidden truths, because Solomon carried more than music. He carried a past that could destroy Everett's carefully polished image. And Amira. She wasn't about to let the only person who made her speak vanish without a fight. At first, Everett tried to rationalize it. It had to be coincidence. Amira's first word just happened to slip out when the man was playing guitar. That was all. Nothing mystical, nothing extraordinary, just timing. But deep down, Everett knew better. He had witnessed the shift, the unmistakable spark in his daughter's eyes when she looked at Solomon Reed. It wasn't coincidence. It was connection, and connection terrified him. Everett was a man who controlled outcomes. In boardrooms, on construction sites, in negotiations with investors, he orchestrated everything. But this was something money couldn't contain. A stranger had stepped into his carefully curated world and done in seconds what years of wealth and expertise had failed to do. "Amira," Everett whispered that night as he tucked her into bed. "What happened today?" He hesitated, his throat tight. "Do you want to see him again?" Her eyes, dark and intelligent, flicked toward him. She didn't speak, but she gave the smallest nod, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Everett barely slept. The next day, Everett returned to the park. He told himself it was for Amira's sake, but in truth, he was chasing answers. Solomon was there again, sitting on the same bench, playing to no one in particular. The melody was different this time, slower, melancholy. Everett stood watching, torn between gratitude and suspicion. When Solomon finally noticed him, he gave a polite nod. Not the obsequious kind Everett was used to from those who recognized him. Just a nod, equal to equal. "You have a gift," Everett said stiffly. Solomon shrugged. "It's just music." "No," Everett pressed. "You don't understand. My daughter, she spoke yesterday, for the first time in her life, while listening to you." At this, Solomon's hand stilled on the strings. His gaze softened as though he understood the weight of what Everett was saying. "Children know truth when they hear it," he said quietly. "Sometimes music says what words can't." Everett bristled. Something in Solomon's calm unsettled him. "What's your background?" he asked sharply. "You've clearly trained." For a flicker of a second, Everett thought he saw pain cross the man's face. But then Solomon just strummed another chord. Does it matter? It mattered to Everett, more than he could admit. But before he could press, Amira tugged on his sleeve. She had drawn something in her sketchbook, a picture of Solomon with his guitar, a faint smile on her face. Everett's chest tightened. His daughter was choosing. By the third visit, word began to spread. A few passers-by noticed the wealthy Everett Laine sitting beside a street musician, watching his daughter hum along. Whispers stirred. Why is Laine fraternizing with a nobody? Phones discreetly snapped photos, and then came the article. Millionaire architect seen in park with street performer. Mystery surrounds child's connection. The headline exploded across social media, painting the image of Everett not as a father, but as a spectacle. Comments poured in. Why is he letting his daughter near that man? Doesn't he know what people will think? That musician looks like trouble. It wasn't just prejudice. It was fear of contamination. The rich, guarding their world against intrusion. And Everett, for all his power, wasn't immune to that fear. At a board meeting the following week, one of his senior partners leaned close and whispered, "Everett, we're hearing questions. Investors don't like uncertainty. People are asking why you're seen so often with him." "With who?" Everett asked coldly, though he knew. "The man in the park, the performer. You know how people talk. They'll twist anything. You have an image to protect." Everett's jaw clenched. He wanted to say he helped my daughter find her voice. He wanted to shout it. But instead he said nothing. Amira, however, had no such caution. She began sketching. Solomon constantly. His guitar, his hands, the curve of his smile when he noticed her drawings. And then, shockingly, she whispered her second word one evening at dinner. "Play." Everett froze, fork suspended in the air. "Amira, did you say?" She nodded. "Play," she repeated softly. "Not daddy, not home, not even yes or no." Her second word was for Solomon. Everett's heart cracked open with both joy and jealousy. She was speaking. She was blossoming. But she wasn't blossoming for him. The more Everett tried to limit her visits to the park, the more resistant Amira became. Silent tantrums, drawn-out stares, her small body stiffening whenever he tried to lead her away. For a child who had never spoken, her defiance screamed louder than words. One afternoon, Amira slipped away from their estate without permission. The staff found her hours later, at the park, sitting cross-legged beside Solomon, humming while he played. When Everett arrived, panic flooding his veins, he found her glowing with joy, utterly unafraid. "You don't own her voice," Solomon said calmly as Everett approached. "She's my daughter," Everett snapped. "Everything she is, everything she has, comes from me." Solomon's eyes hardened. "No, you've given her silence. She chose her first words with me. The A statement was a blade. Everett felt it cut through his pride. Rage, confusion, and something dangerously close to gratitude warred inside him. He pulled Amira away. But the look she gave him, betrayal, pleading, longing, haunted him all night. Then came the first glimpse of Solomon's hidden past. Everett's assistant brought him a file. She whispered, "You should see this before the press does." Inside were old clippings. Solomon Reed, concert pianist. Headlines from years ago praising his brilliance, his meteoric rise. And then, abruptly, scandal. Accusations of misconduct from a wealthy patron's daughter. No conviction, but no trial either. Just ruin. His career gone in an instant. Everett stared at the pages, his pulse thundering. Was this the man who held his daughter's trust? Was he savior or danger? The next time he saw Solomon in the park, Everett's voice was like ice. "I know who you are." Solomon looked up, unflinching. "Then you know the story they told. But do you know the truth?" Everett hesitated. But Amira chose that moment to speak again. Not a single word this time, but a full sentence, fragile but clear. "Don't hurt him." Everett froze. His daughter's third miracle. And it was a plea for the man he wasn't sure he could trust. The world tilted beneath his feet, and for the first time in his life, Everett Laine didn't know what to build, or what to tear down. The boardroom was a place Everett had always ruled with precision. Walls of glass framed the skyline he had built, the city glittering like a kingdom he commanded. His executives sat around the sleek table, murmuring as if awaiting a verdict. But for the first time in decades, Everett felt like an intruder in his own empire. On the glossy screen at the end of the room, photographs flicked past in cruel succession. Everett in Brookvale Park, Amira by his side, Solomon Reed in the background, guitar in hand, and then headlines. Millionaire architect seen with fallen musician accused of scandal. Laine's daughter finds her voice in controversial company. One partner cleared his throat. Everett, the optics are dangerous. Investors are calling. They want to know why your child, your brand, is associated with a man like this. A woman at the far end added, "We're not saying cut him out entirely, but distance is necessary, for your reputation, and for the company's survival." Everett clenched his jaw. His reputation, his empire. The skyscrapers outside gleamed like trophies. But what good were trophies if his daughter remained locked in silence? Except she wasn't silent anymore. She had spoken. She had blossomed. Because of Solomon. Yet the eyes in that boardroom weren't on Amira's joy. They were on the stain of Solomon's past. "Handle it, Everett," one voice said, sharply. "Remove him from the picture." For the first time in his career, Everett stood and walked out mid-meeting. That evening, Amira sat in her art studio, sketching with furious determination. Page after page, she drew Solomon, his guitar, his hands, his smile, but also something else, a broken piano surrounded by storm clouds. Her small fingers smudged charcoal across the paper, her face flushed with emotion. "Amira," Everett said softly, entering the room. "We need to talk." She didn't look up. She pressed harder, darkening the storm around the piano. "They want me to keep you away from him," Everett admitted, his voice hoarse. Her head snapped up. For the first time, anger flashed in her eyes. Not fear, not silence, but fire. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling, and out came a fragile but steady sentence. "You don't get to take him. Everett froze. His chest ached. She was speaking. Sentences, and every word was in defense of Solomon Reed. The confrontation came 2 days later, in the park where it had all begun. Everett arrived with Amira, determined to end it. He had rehearsed his lines. Gratitude for Solomon's help, regret that their paths must part, insistence that it was best for Amira's safety. Clean, surgical. But when he reached the bench, Solomon was already there, guitar case open, eyes calm. And Amira, before Everett could stop her, ran forward, throwing her arms around him. Everett's throat tightened. The image was wrong, dangerous. People were watching. Cameras could be lurking. Solomon, Everett began, his voice hard. This has gone too far. My daughter needs boundaries. She needs stability, not this. He gestured vaguely, as if the guitar and the man himself were hazards to be fenced off. Solomon didn't rise to the bait. He simply met Everett's gaze. And what is this? Music? Honesty? Or the fact that I'm not the kind of man your world accepts? Everett stiffened. You don't know my world. I know enough, Solomon said quietly. I was in it once. I know how quickly they turn. I know how a rumor can destroy you. I know what it's like to be erased for a story that isn't true. Amira tugged at Everett's sleeve. Daddy, she whispered, her voice fragile but clear. He listens to me. Everett swallowed hard, his daughter's voice finally free, and every word she used was a weapon against his fear. Do you even know what people say about you? Everett demanded, turning back to Solomon. I read the reports, the scandal, the accusations. For the first time, Solomon's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his fingers clenched around the guitar neck. Do you know what it's like, he said, voice low, to be judged guilty because of your skin before anyone hears your truth? To have everything stolen because one powerful family decided you didn't belong near their daughter's piano? They didn't want a black man headlining their concert halls. They wanted me gone. So they buried me in lies. Everett faltered. The words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. He looked down at Amira, at her wide eyes, her trembling hand gripping his. She spoke with me, Solomon continued, softer. Now. Not because of who I am, but because of what she needed. Do you care so much about your reputation that you'll silence her again? The question cut him open. Everett saw his life stretched out in two paths. One where he obeyed the board, preserved his empire and watched his daughter retreat back into silence, and another where he risked everything for the fragile miracle she had found. The air seemed to thrum with decision. Amira broke it. Her small voice, stronger this time, rose like a bell. Don't leave him. Everett froze. This wasn't just a plea. It was a demand. His daughter, the girl he thought forever mute, had chosen her voice, and she had chosen Solomon with it. Everett's pride, his fear, his empire, they all weighed on him like lead. But in that moment, with his daughter's eyes locked on his and Solomon's quiet strength holding steady, Everett felt the walls of his old world crumble. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he sat down, on the same bench, beside the man he had been taught to fear and dismiss. The cameras might have been watching. The world might have been ready to judge. But Everett Laine no longer cared. And that choice, the act of sitting, of staying, would ignite a storm he could no longer control. The photograph of Everett Laine on that park bench went viral overnight. Captured. From 3 different angles, it spread across tabloids, investment blogs, social feeds, and news cycles with astonishing speed. One shot showed Solomon with his guitar at his side, Amira pressed tightly against him. Another framed Everett in the middle, shoulders rigid, yet seated beside the man the world insisted he should reject. Within hours, headlines bloomed like wildfire. Laine breaks with tradition, seen publicly supporting disgraced musician. Architect of skylines, destroyer of reputations. Mute heiress speaks her first words in public, with him. By dawn, his office was ablaze with messages. Half were condemnations. The other half, astonishingly, were messages of awe. In the glass-walled boardroom again, Everett faced the storm. "This is reckless," snapped one partner. "We have contracts on the line. Clients are calling in panic." Another leaned forward, voice sharp. "Do you understand the precedent this sets? If you tie your name to Reed, you're telling the world his scandal doesn't matter." Everett listened. He absorbed every word like stones hurled against armor. Yet behind him, Amira stood quietly in her yellow dress, a sketchbook pressed to her chest. Finally, he raised a hand. "For decades, I've built towers of steel and glass, monuments to ambition, but none of it compares to the moment my daughter spoke her first words, and it was Solomon Reed who unlocked them." The board stirred, some indignant, others unsettled. "I.e., won't erase the man who gave her voice back. If that costs us deals, if it costs me position, then so be it. My daughter's voice is worth more than any skyline." The room fell silent. No one had ever heard Everett Laine speak with such raw conviction. But the consequences came fast. 2 major clients withdrew contracts, citing concerns about reputational risk. News outlets replayed clips of Solomon's old scandal, painting him as a liability. Protesters even appeared outside Everett's offices, holding signs that read, "Protect your brand," and "Silence the scandal." Amira saw them one afternoon as Everett hurried her into the car. She pressed her hand against the window, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition. "They don't want me to speak," she whispered. Everett's heart broke. He realized then that this wasn't just about Solomon, it was about her. About a world too quick to silence voices it didn't understand. And so, he made a choice. Instead of hiding Amira away, Everett brought her forward. The first time she spoke in public was at a charity gala weeks later. The room was filled with the city's elite, every camera angled toward the stage. Everett stood beside her, trembling in a way he hadn't felt since his youth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you know my daughter, Amira. Many of you also know she has struggled with silence for years. Tonight she has something she wishes to say herself." Gasps rippled through the room, murmurs of skepticism. Then the microphone was lowered into her tiny hands. She hesitated. Her lip trembled. Then she took a breath, found Solomon's eyes in the crowd, and spoke. "Thank you for hearing me." The room erupted, not with laughter or dismissal, but with applause that shook the chandeliers. Cameras flashed, capturing her voice, her courage, her first public declaration of self, and beside her, Everett's tears slid unchecked down his cheeks. The backlash did not vanish overnight. Some investors still fled, some journalists still sneered. But a counter-narrative grew stronger every day. The story of a mute girl who found her voice through music. The father who risked his empire to protect her healing. The man the world tried to bury, who became the bridge between them. Solomon Reed was no longer just a fallen musician. He was now being written about as a mentor, a teacher, a man who sparked a miracle. Invitations began arriving, not for glamorous concerts, but for community programs, schools, therapy centers. His name was whispered again in reverence, though this time it was for his resilience, not his fame. Everett, once obsessed with his towers of glass, found himself at these small gatherings more than at his skyscraper unveilings. He watched children sing, he watched Amira laugh, and he watched Solomon, still carrying his scars, still cautious, but undeniably alive again. One evening, after another program where Amira had read a short poem aloud to thunderous applause, Everett found himself walking beside Solomon under the city lights. "I don't know if I've ever said this," Everett admitted, "but I was wrong about you, about what matters." Solomon gave a faint smile. "You were afraid. Fear makes us all cruel." Everett stopped. "Do you forgive me?" Solomon looked away, his gaze on the towers Everett had built. "Forgiveness is a process, but Amira, she already gave it, and maybe that's enough for both of us." Everett nodded. He understood. In the months that followed, Amira's voice grew stronger. She spoke at conferences, schools, and once, astonishingly, at City Hall, advocating for children with selective mutism. Every time she spoke, she carried Solomon's music in her cadence, his strength in her tone, and her father's pride in her gaze. Everett's empire did change. He lost some projects, but he gained something else. Legacy. Not the cold permanence of glass and steel, but the living legacy of a girl whose words healed others. And the world, slowly, began to listen differently. On the anniversary of that fateful day in the park, Everett, Amira, and Solomon returned to the same bench. No cameras, no crowds, just the three of them. Amira climbed onto the bench, placed her small hand on her father's, and then reached for Solomon's. She looked at them both, her voice soft but unwavering. Voices don't belong in cages, they belong in the world. Everett closed his eyes, letting the truth of her words sink in. His empire had once been built on silence. Silence of workers, silence of those pushed aside, silence of a daughter hidden in shadows. But now, it thrived on a voice. A miracle voice. And for the first time he realized the world could take his towers, his titles, his contracts, but it could never take this.